A big welcome to all of you. I want to officially welcome you to the War on Compassion in Conversation with Wayne Hsiung here tonight in the Animal Justice Academy. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I am the director of AJA, and I just really want to say I'm so happy to see so many faces here. For those of you who are new to the AJA community, AJA is a training program, an action collective, and a community for animal advocates. If you're not already officially an AJA, it's super easy. It's free. You can sign up at animaljusticeacademy.com. And when you do that, you get instant access to our 6-week animal advocacy course. It's very robust. Everything you need to know to kind of, spread your wings as an advocate. You can join our active and private Facebook group, one of the sweetest places to hang out online in animal rights. And you'll receive notices of our collection actions and, of course, first notice of our events. All right, I want to introduce this fine being that is joining us, folks. Wayne Hsiung is an animal cruelty investigator, a former faculty member at Northwestern School of Law, co-founder and former lead organizer of the grassroots animal rights network Direct Action Everywhere, and co-founder and current executive director of the Simple Heart Initiative. Wayne has led teams that have investigated and rescued animals from factory farms and slaughterhouses across the US, challenging unconstitutional ag-gag laws in the process, and has organized successful campaigns to ban fur in San Francisco and California. I'm not sure, San Francisco and somewhere all of California. I'll have to ask you about that in a second. Wayne served as lead counsel and sometimes defendant in 4 right to rescue trials in which activists were prosecuted after being charged for giving aid to sick and dying animals in factory farms. Of course, these trials garnered media attention from huge international media, including the New York Times. And so prior to his work as an animal advocate, Wayne practiced law at 2 national firms and studied law and economics at University of Chicago and at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Also, most importantly, Wayne is the proud parent Oliver, who was rescued from the dog meat trade. Wayne, welcome, my friend.
Oh, thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. And yeah, Ollie is definitely the best thing in my life and probably my proudest achievement, bringing him into my family. Though, yeah, honestly, he gets more of the credit than I do because he had to fight pretty hard to make it through what he went through. So
no kidding, huh? That is, and man, did Ollie win the sweepstakes with you.
yeah. I won the sweepstakes of him too, because he's just the most incredible living creature I've ever met in my life. And I've been lucky enough to be around a lot of really incredible animals. So
Well, Wayne, first of all, I just want to say, I know you have so much on the go right now. We're going to hear about just a fraction of it. So we so appreciate you giving us some of your precious time. We really don't take that lightly. So thank you.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I appreciate this. There are a lot of lessons that people are trying to draw from the most recent election, but one of the most important ones that has not been discussed enough is the importance of just grassroots organizing and gatherings like this. And one of the most kind of intelligent, insightful analyses of the Democrats' defeat made the point that membership in the Democratic Party has become too much like a mailing list and not enough like meeting with your neighbors. And it's meetings like this that drive real change. So grateful to you and to everyone else for being here today. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think that is really special. I mean, even if it is online, there's something to be said for okay, all these people turned out live and we're here together and we're having this experience together and we're getting inspired and we're conspiring together. And so I think that's it's not something to be taken lightly. So Wayne, for anyone who is new to this arena, I explained before we started that we have some veteran animal advocates here. We have some people that are really new to the scene. Can you start by giving us a little history of the open rescue movement and your involvement in this whole thing?
Yeah, open rescue started in the early 1990s with, mild-mannered grandmother in Australia named Patty Mark, who's become not just a hero of mine, but someone I consider a dear friend. And Patty, like a lot of us, was somebody who loved animals, rescued animals, but didn't really see herself as kind of the tip of the spear of some sort of huge international political movement. She just wanted to help animals. And she seized an opportunity to do that when there was a local worker in an egg farm um, who started trying to find someone to help him with a very bad case of animal cruelty. And this is a battery cage facility where some of these older battery cage facilities would have multiple layers where the hens are essentially just dripping feces all over each other. And at the bottom of the lower level of the battery cage, the feces would drip down to this kind of almost basement area that was underneath wire that would just be filled with feces and decomposing eggs and all sorts of disgusting things. And this employee was particularly concerned because a lot of times, whether because a hen escaped from a cage, because a worker, saw like a sick animal and just decided to throw them down into the litter pile on the bottom, this worker would be seeing live animals basically collapsed in drowning in feces and just having feces raining down on them, unable to access food and water, slowly wasting away in this pile at the bottom of the cage farm. And he thought, this seems kind of messed up. But he went to the authorities, did nothing. He went to the kind of supervisors that the company was working for, did nothing. And so eventually he did something that increasingly is happening across the world, even among the workers who work within the industry, which is he went to local animal advocates. And one of the people he found was this woman, Patty Mark. And Patty initially thought like, oh, surely someone's going to do something about this. So she actually tried to use conventional channels initially and say like, look, I mean, this is clearly animal cruelty. There are laws being broken here, and got the same response this employee got. And so she decided, well, what's the right thing to do when you know someone's hurting an animal and no one else is able to help? You try and help yourself. And that's what she did. But what Patty did was very different from kind of the ALF style actions that had occurred starting in the 1970s, in that she was completely open about what she did. Um, and this is not just a strategic, but a philosophical difference. And the philosophical point she was trying to make, and she made so powerfully to the point that she inspired a movement over the world. And she's the reason I've devoted the last 20 years of my life to rescue, is that if we think what we're doing is right, we shouldn't hide it. If you believe what you're saying, if you believe what you're doing is correct, why should you be the one who hides what you do? Why should you be the person who covers your face with a mask? You should be open about it. And that was the genesis of Open Rescue, because Patty, again, Patty herself would say, I'm not some grand political theorist. I'm not someone who's trying to kind of create some grand strategy for a world-changing global movement. But she captured this very basic intuition that I think a lot of us have just in our everyday lives, that, look, when people are trying to hide things, they're probably up to no good. Well, if people are open about what they're doing, then that says something about the integrity of their actions. And so Patty went in and just started taking some of the animals out with the employees' collaboration and reporting exactly what she did to the authorities. And now for the last 30 plus years, we've seen probably at least thousands, maybe tens of thousands of animals saved. And I would expect at least hundreds of millions of people exposed to the cruelties within factory farms, because so many activists, including myself, have followed in Patty's footsteps and gone into these places ourselves, taking the animals out and shown the world exactly what we did and why.
Mm. And did you, reading your bio and like, oh, you were studying economics and like, did you ever imagine that
No,
this
not at
would
all.
be the path you take?
No, if you had told me in 2001 when I entered grad school, so I'm older than a lot of people think, and I was in grad school in 2001, but I was a PhD student in economics. I thought I was going to go be a number cruncher and sit in front of spreadsheets for the rest of my life. If you had told me in 2001 or 2002, I think I first heard of Open Rescue in 2002 because of the work that Josh Balk and Mune Park and Paul Shapiro did at Compassion Over Killing in the early 2000s. There was a piece in the Washington Post about their open rescue work. And I was very inspired by it. And I thought, I mean, kind of like the way you watch a superhero movie and you're like, oh, that's so cool. Look at what Iron Man's able to do. If you had told me you're
Josh
going to
is a
be
bit
Iron
like
Man, I
Iron
thought that's
Man.
absurd. That's ridiculous.
Uh,
I'm not less, I'm not like the Scarlet Witch or Iron Man or only any of these superheroes or Wonder Woman. I'm just some dude who's kind of a dork and pretty shy and scared of my own shadow. I'm not going to be that sort of person. And it's funny because everyone has a story about how they become who they become. And And so I don't know if the story is correct, but the story, I think I tell myself, and I think notwithstanding the fact that I think a lot of people are deluded about their own self-narrative, I really think the people who've watched my life, who know me best, would agree with this assessment, which is the primary reason I changed was because of failure. It wasn't because of success. It was because if I had not failed abjectly as an economist, if I had not failed abjectly as a law professor, if I had not failed in the other activism I was doing, I would not have been willing to take the risks I ultimately took starting in around 2007 to be an open rescue activist. So yeah, it's been a big
Mm.
change.
You say fail. I would say maybe finding that the path wasn't the path that was working for you. That's
Yeah,
being a little hard on yourself, Wayne. I think I need to have a couple of words here with you.
yeah, I need to work on my positive affirmations.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
not my strength, but yeah, that's a better
Mm,
characterization. I like your characterization
yeah.
better.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I want to get a little bit more into this idea of the effectiveness of open rescues. Now, because we're a team full of lawyers, I have to do a quick disclaimer. Animal justice, we're a legally focused organization, so our tactics need to respect the law, but we do absolutely recognize the importance to discuss a range of strategies in the animal advocacy movement. And so speaking of lawyers, open rescues have landed people, including you, into lengthy, expensive trials, even jail.
Mhm.
It's taken some of the top activists out of the game for a while. But despite that, you seem convinced about the power of open rescue. Can you give an example? Just the media alone has been such a thing with the open rescue, such wins. So can you talk a little bit about that balance of what we're losing versus what we're gaining from open rescue?
Yeah, so one just concrete example is when we open rescued two baby pigs from the largest pig farm in the nation in southern Utah. It's a place called Circle 4 Farms. It's a factory farm that is significantly larger than the entire city of San Francisco. It is massive. 1.2 million pigs produced and slaughtered every year. Now shutting down, I think partly because of our work. I mean, the company won't say exactly why they're shutting down, but it's disappearing as I speak. Um, so we rescued these two piglets, exposed that the company had lied to the public about the use of so-called gestation crates, these metal tombs where mother pig lives in a 2 foot by 7 foot metal box or virtually her entire adult life. When they charged us and started investigating so-called racketeering, a single article written about this investigation and prosecution by a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist named Glenn Greenwald. He wrote in The Intercept. He wrote a piece about the FBI's hunt for piglets, where they cross state lines in a caravan of cars to try and hunt down these piglets that we supposedly stole, but really rescued. This was shared 130,000 times on Facebook alone. It not only convinced Glenn, but it convinced, by my count, at least thousands of people to go vegetarian and vegan if you look at the number of comments, because it was just such a dramatic story that engaged people, but also a very persuasive story when you actually looked at what was actually happening in the industry, because it was a story not just of huge stakes where people were facing, in my case, 4 felony charges, including a racketeering charge. It is usually a charge that's brought against organized crime syndicates, people like drug cartels that are murdering people and transporting hundreds of millions of dollars in drugs. It wasn't just the
It makes sense.
stakes.
Wayne, I want to put I want to hit that home.
Mhm.
It seems gangster syndicates and people saving little
Piglets.
piglets. It seems pretty equal to
Yeah,
me.
pretty comparable, right? No, it was wild. I mean, it was just, yeah, and yeah, and I think we knew this. I knew this going into this. I thought that one of the things you're trying to do as an activist is create what political scientists call decision dilemmas, right? And a decision dilemma is when an institution that you believe needs to change is forced to choose between decisions that are kind of equally bad, for their efforts to repress change. So from our perspective, when we openly rescued these pigs, and Glenn Greenwald and the Washington Post and the New York Times write these articles about how the FBI is cracking down on animal rights activists. If the FBI doesn't crack down, we do it more, and we've done this. We've had hundreds of people walk with us into factory farms taking animals out. And at some point, they're going to have to stop us. And if they don't stop us, more and more people are going to do this, and more people are going to feel like, wow, I guess it is legal and totally within our rights to just rescue animals when they're being abused by factory farms. But if they do try and crack down, then what they get is massive media backlash because our activism is peaceful, it is transparent, it is in alignment with most ordinary people's common sense intuitions about what should be done when an animal is sick or injured or starving to death. And so the industry doesn't really know how to respond. And I've gone into all these trials, and we just had one with a good friend and my client Tracy Murphy that went our way legally. But and I told Tracy, I told my Ridglan co-defendants a case involving 3 beagles we rescued from a lab in Wisconsin. I've told everyone who has been involved in these cases, there's a decision dilemma on the other side, and in many ways we win even if we lose, because even if they charge us, even if we are convicted in court, and I have been convicted a couple times. Granted, we've won most of our cases by like a 90-10 mark. We've won probably
Amazing.
90% of our cases and lost 10%. But even when we lose, probably the single largest in-person mobilization in the Bay Area for animal rights happened at my sentencing hearing, where there were just hundreds of people swarming the courtroom and really interested and engaged in the case because I in that case, but in other cases like the recent Osha Farm case, Tracy Murphy, my client, people are willing to sacrifice. And there's something that's communicated to the world when you see people really willing to sacrifice.
And Wayne, what makes people really willing to sacrifice at the core is what we're seeing
Mm.
animals having to go through, the just beyond nightmarish conditions that most of the animals that are being raised for food in this world are going through. And so I can imagine what you've had to go through, the sort of the amount of personal strife you've had to go through. I imagine you have seen things that have just fortified you at some level that is, that a lot of people that haven't seen it can't understand. So can you tell us about some of the experiences in your investigative or rescue work that have really affected you deeply on your timeline?
Yeah, it's one thing to note about investigations is if you ever have a chance to be a part of an investigation or rescue in one of these mass confinement facilities, it's an extremely intense and transformative experience. But a lot of times, actually, you don't necessarily feel what you expect to feel in the moment because the adrenaline is coursing through your body. You don't really have the time to be mindful, right? Because you've got objectives that you're trying to achieve. You got the stress of potentially being caught and prosecuted running through your mind while you're kind of doing all the things you need to do. Um, and so, I mean, I've seen such awful things, but it, it's funny how much the moments where you really, really do feel what you're experiencing and feel what you're seeing really do stand out because normally you're just in such fight or flight mode, right? And um, this recent Ridgeland case was one of them. So Ridgeland is one of the largest beagle production facilities in the nation. They have anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 beagles they send to just vile experiments. I mean, stuff that is so evil, it's hard to even believe it's real. I mean, so the worst experiment that we found that really hit me even before we did the open rescue was this experiment by this place called the Lovelace Foundation, which is funded with taxpayer dollars. It's a place where they have done some of the most disgusting toxicology experiments, inhalation experiments. So they do all sorts of things to inject beagles with disgusting chemicals, radiation, and watch their bodies deteriorate over months, in some cases years. But this place, the Lovelace Institute, had decided, we need to figure out whether laundry detergent is bad for people because you never know. There might be some case where a kid drinks laundry detergent. So let's find out how bad it is. And so let's force feed dozens of beagles laundry detergent and see what happens. And the reason they choose beagles obviously is because they're extremely docile. In fact, this is not something we're saying. I mean, a lot of times, like the public says, oh, come on, you guys are exaggerating. This couldn't be that evil of an industry. But literally, you can look at the industry's own manuals and documents, and they're they self-describe themselves as targeting the most vulnerable and docile breed of dog. They're small, so they're easy to manipulate. And then their demeanor, they're very docile and gentle. They won't bite, because if you're going to be stuffing a tube and force feeding industrial chemicals down an animal's throat every day, I mean, if they bite you, that's going to be a problem. And in fact, one of the reasons they ultimately switched to dogs, because they initially had to use primates for a lot of these experiments, because they found the primates would fight back or just die. They would be unwilling to perform the experiments. They would just eventually either give up on everything and just stop eating and starve themselves to death and die, or they would fight back to the point that, you just can't do the experiment because they're clawing your eyes out, because they don't want to be radiated. They don't want to be force-fed laundry detergent. So this place does all these awful things. And I knew all these things before I went in. And we went in through an unlocked door. Vivisection facilities are much more secure than factory farms. So it was actually kind of random luck. There was not even an unlocked door. There was a door that was just left adjacent, and all the other doors were open. It was funny because we thought we were so lucky, and we're like, oh my God, look at this. They just left the door open. But it turns out there was a silent alarm that went off. And so all these security trucks came screaming into the facility an hour later, and we had to get out. But the experience I wanted to tell you about, and sorry, this is a very long windup to the ultimate question and point that you made and that I want to make, is that you walk in this facility and there's just hundreds of dogs on all sides, all of them in these 2x4 cages, living on wire, standing in their own feces. A lot of them have injuries of various sorts from staying on wire. A lot of them are going psychotic. I'd estimate probably about, even just from an immediate first glance at what's going on in the facility, you're probably noticing something pathologically wrong with about 1 in 5 of the dogs, like spinning uncontrollably, bobbing their heads, gnawing on bars, whatever it is. I mean, they all are going through some sort of psychosis. But there was this one dog who, like, we initially saw her spinning, that's true of a lot of dogs. But it's weird, the things that stick with you. But the thing that stuck with me is, well, 2 things. One is, as we got closer, she would stop for a moment and look at us. But there was clearly something wrong with her, the way she was perceiving the world. Like, because she would look at us and it was like she was looking right through us. If you've ever been around someone who's on some sort of drug and they can't focus their eyes, or they're drunk and they're clearly just kind of discombobulated to the point they feel very uncertain. And it was like a very fearful look in her eyes, but it's like she couldn't focus on us. It was like she was looking right through us, and it was very confusing. The other thing we noticed is she'd be looking at us very intently and curiously, but just couldn't seem to focus her eyes on us. Like, she'd be looking through us or to the side of us, not quite sure. And she was like kind of moving her head in a way that suggested confusion. Is every time we walked away, she was spinning even faster. Like, and you can even see this in video footage. I've posted about this on my Substack, that when you walk away, because we left the camera there and just let it roll, she spun, and spun even faster. And to the point that, like, it was clearly hurting her, the fact that she was spinning, because we saw in her paws were like all inflamed and red, and she was clearly in a lot of pain. And we got her out. So don't worry, everyone, we got this little beagle out. And when we got her out later, we named her Julie. Her feet were in a lot of pain. So she was like walking very gingerly everywhere she walked. And then you can only imagine how much pain she would have been and how much psychological trauma she must have been going through, despite the fact that she had these inflamed, infected feet. She's spinning and spinning and spinning, like almost like a little tornado. And when I saw that and I looked back at her, like, it definitely hit me. Like, because you just realize, I mean, it's just, when you just take a moment to try and imagine what this individual animal is going through, the desperation they have to escape, how much they need your help. And, there was this physical manifestation of that was really, really powerful, and yeah, like it was really, really dark for us, because there were just so many dogs like that. And we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to get any of them out. And yeah, one of the hardest decisions I made, and one of the best decisions I made, was I told you that these alarms went off, and initially it was a silent alarm apparently, but for whatever reason, after, I guess, about 15 minutes, the alarms went audible, and there was just this blaring siren throughout the entire facility, to the point that I think probably people miles away could hear this. It was so loud inside Ridglan that our lookout, who heard this outside, tried to walk it into us and basically give us the code red and say, like, look, you guys need to get out. There's alarms and sirens going off throughout the facility. And we could not hear it. I could not hear the alarms outside. I also could not hear my team member talking in my ear at maximum volume. And she had to come running in and basically grab me and shake me and scream into my ear. And even then, I wasn't quite sure what she was saying, but she said, you need to get out. And so we got out of there and we had to leave Julie behind, because we just didn't have time. We'd just seen her and we didn't know, whether security was going to come, and security in fact did come, and we got out just in time. And we learned this later when the prosecution gave us documents about what had actually happened that night. We found out there was a security guard who did drive through, and we had a lookout who saw this too, but we weren't sure exactly who this person was and what they had concluded from the alarm going off. But the security guard drove right by, actually even noticed our gear bags outside of the facility, but just thought they were trash bags and didn't even stop to look at them. So if he had looked through them, he would have seen all these cameras and all this gear for an investigation and rescue. But one of the reasons, so we obviously jet out and get out of the facility, but like all of our team members were terrified, obviously, because we know this is like a highly secure facility. We know this is a region where the biomedical industry and the vivisection industry is really powerful, and this is rural Wisconsin, where frankly a lot of people have guns. And we're debating whether to come back. And I think, honestly, just one of the reasons that I made the call, and I think one of the reasons the team all decided we were willing to take the risk to go back in, even after this alarm had gone off, was because all of us could see that Julie needed us, and she had told us this. She told us with her eyes, with the look on her face, and even just the way she was so frantic when we walked away, that you got to help me. I can't stay here. I can't stay here any longer. I need to get out. And yeah, I mean, you can tell even my voice now, like it's years later, but even just remembering that moment and just feeling that sense of desperation of like thinking we had just, and it's really weird because there's 3,000 dogs there, right? And it's really hard to think about the other 2,999. And we didn't. I mean, it's just, and this is also the power of open rescue. It really does get you to think about the one. And it's so hard to empathize with 3,000 animals because it's just, the way I always explain it is, it's just like if you're having a conversation, it's really hard to have a conversation even with two people because you can't feel what two people are feeling. You're just confused going back and forth. But when you really just think about one, and like when we left and we were all running, like running, sprinting out of the facility, running away. And then we sit in a car for a while and are waiting for the lookout to say the security trucks have gone away. Like all of us, just for a moment, imagined what Julie was going through, just that one. And we remembered what she had told us, that I need your help. You can't leave me here. You can't. I'm scared and my feet hurt and I need to get out. And then it became easy. And like for me, I said, we're going back and we're going to get her out. And we did. And again, really hard decision. I will say, like, the team members ultimately very supportive, but they all had like whites in their eyes when I said we're going back, because they're like, are you out of your mind initially? Like, again, this is, we already at that point had charges starting to come down on activists. This is a very rural conservative region of Wisconsin, in a larger progressive county, Dane County, but that particular area is very rural. A lot of people armed. We know vivisection facility is very secure. We just had an alarm go off that was blaring to the point that people probably 5 miles away could hear this, and you want us to go back, and we did. And because of that, we got Julie out. And frankly, not just that. The moral of the story is, it wasn't just rescuing Julie that we accomplished because we went back, but we had 3 hours, 2 hours of uninhibited time for us to shoot, including with VR cameras. And one of the reasons we were able to go to the court just a couple of weeks ago and present evidence of animal cruelty and play those videos of Julie spinning and other dogs with, sores in their face, sores in their feet from standing on wire, is because we did go back. And now we have a chance to save 3,000 of them. And just like, there isn't a day over the last few weeks that I haven't woken up just, yeah, it's tough because I have to say, like, it's stressful to think about even one dog, like imagine like your dog were stuck in that situation. Every day you had to wake up and think, man, I wonder if Oliver's going to get out. Like, I wonder if someone's going to help Oliver, how stressful that would be. And we can't even mathematically calculate the suffering of these animals and really appreciate it fully. But every day over the last couple of weeks, ever since we were in Ridglan, or every day since we were testifying against Ridglan on October 23rd, I've woken up and thought about these 3,000 dogs. And while it's super, super stressful, I have to say, and I've definitely had some nightmares. And we obviously are hoping and praying the judge rules in the right way and in a legal way, frankly. Um, the thing that keeps me ticking is the fact that I know that, look, we're all going to go through hardships and we're all going to take big risks. And everyone's conception of big risk is different. For some people, just telling your family, look, we're not going to have turkey this Thanksgiving. That could be a big risk for you. And I support that. Like whatever risks you can take them, because not everyone's going to be in the position that I'm in where, I'm relatively privileged. I don't have any kids. I can go out and do wild stuff, and not that many people are affected other than my dad and my dog. My dad and my dog are both affected because my dad gets scared, and he's cried many tears over all my imprisonments and criminal cases, and that's honestly the most stressful thing for me, just seeing my dad suffering because of what I've gone through. But for you, the risk might be smaller, but the risk has rewards. And even the fact that we're able to get in court and present this evidence for the first time in Dane County history, to ask for criminal charges to be filed against a huge corporate animal abuser, you know, even the chance to save these 3,000 dogs makes it more than justified, everything we did. So anyways, so that was
Yeah,
a
and
longer
you
answer to a bigger question than you
no,
asked.
it's so important to, you know, have your experience, like to be able to go through that with you. You're right. A lot of folks here won't necessarily, won't be able to do open rescue, but to be able to support those who do open rescue, to be able to disseminate the information, to be able to advocate for, it. It's important for us to really understand the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And just so people know, Wayne was saying before we started that they're all on pins and needles because the judge was supposed to come out with their answer in the shortly, right? Is that right, Wayne? So if we're kind of
Any moment.
following, we'll hear the answer shortly.
Yeah. I'm honestly way more nervous about this situation than I've been in my criminal cases because, my criminal cases, it's one person's incarceration that's at stake. In this case, it's 3,000
Right.
sentient beings. And,
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
I know
you're
Julie
right. It's
very
so much
well.
more tangible, right?
Yeah.
Than what usually open rescue trials are about, just it's not just, but keeping the
Yeah.
defendants out of jail. But you're right, this could lead to the freedom of 3,000 beings that are
Yeah. And,
suffering
and from those
immensely.
3,000, I think if Ridgeland, if Ridgeland is shut down, it's the end of dog experiments in the United States because there's only one other facility left and the industry just will fall apart. It's not going to be able to sustain itself. So this could be freedom for 60,000 dogs and hopefully an end in animal experiments. Because we, you know, chimps have been effectively been freed from experiments. Dogs will be next. And then if we've ended experiments on chimps and dogs, why not bunnies? Why not pigs? Why not mice and fish? It's the argument is the same for all of them. And so once that domino effect starts unfolding, I don't think it's going to be stopped. And really, we're already on that path. This is why I really do think we should be optimistic because, a lot of people don't know this, but animal advocates, in conjunction with a lot of other people working with them, including scientists, did end experiments on chimps. And if you'd asked me when I started, as an animal rights activist in the 1990s, when, I grew up in the era of the AIDS pandemic, where experiments on chimps were considered absolutely necessary. We have to experiment on chimps. We have to inject them with things like HIV. We have to do all these awful things to them because human health depends on it. It's necessary. It's a necessary evil. It's gone. There still is a tiny bit of chimp experimentation, but it's gone in the United States. Um, so we should have not just hope, but confidence that we can save these dogs, we can save the pigs, we can save the mice, and eventually we're going to save them all. I think we're on the right path.
Mm. Wayne, and it's obviously you've this is just one example of what you've seen, and I know from hearing about your work how much you've had to witness, and you're seeing it firsthand, and then most people here are seeing it secondhand. And so Jade is asking here in the chat, how do you deal with the emotional turmoil of knowing animals are in distress, but you cannot save them? Like with Julie, how do you not stay overwhelmed about the other 2,999 dogs you left behind? And I'm curious, Wayne, how how do you take these moments that just sear through your soul,
Yeah.
and how do you sleep? You know,
Yeah.
how do you process that? I mean, this is an area that I'm particularly interested in, you know, advocate wellness. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious to know what your journey has been around being able to have the resilience to heal from that.
Yeah. There's a lot of nitty-gritty tactical things I could suggest, like meditation, exercise. I mean, I do try to do a lot of those things. Like I meditate regularly. I mean, I work out every day. I try to eat healthy. I try to get good sleep, and have like good sleep hygiene. But by far the most important thing is just the fact that I don't just have hope, I have confidence that things are going to change. And partly that's just embodied in my own life every day because I'm one of the lucky animal advocates who every day I wake up in the morning, I look to my side and I see a little miracle, Oliver, right? And Oliver was a farm animal. He was in a dog meat farm in China. He was one of a couple million dogs at the time who were killed in the dog meat trade in China every single year. He was a couple weeks from being beaten to death, which is how they typically kill them in the slaughterhouses of Elan. They take these caliper-like devices like tongs, grab the dog by a neck with one hand, and then take a metal club and just smash their head repeatedly. And I've seen it and I've documented it. We have video footage of it as the dog's wailing in agony. And he was 2 weeks from that fate. This beautiful little creature who's my best friend, like the love of my life. Um, and he's safe and he's loved and he has the best life that any dog could possibly have. And he's given me the best life any human dad could possibly have because every day I get to enjoy having him in my life. And that I think it's yeah, I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned, and I think this is true of just the research on social movements, is movements cannot just be about doom and gloom. It can't just be about the exploitation, the oppression, and suffering. That is an important part of it, you know. Anger about injustice is the fuel for social movements. But there also has to be not just hope, but confidence in our ability to create change, right? And for me, why am I confident we can create change? Because every time I wake up in the morning, I look to my side, Oliver's living proof of that. That frankly, if all we could do was save 1 out of 1 million of the refugees of this horrifically nightmarish and violent atrocity and give them the lives they deserve, that'd be worth doing, you know? Like it's kind of like you think about these historical periods of atrocity and the few people who escape. You know, we see historically those efforts as very worthwhile and even legendary, you know, and they'd saved a few people from these atrocities, whether it's the rape of Nanking, the Holocaust, or whatever it is, you know. You see these stories of even a few lucky refugees getting out. Um, Even if that's all we could achieve, that'd be well worth doing. And that 100% is possible. Like there's just, does anyone in this conversation doubt that we can save a few of these animals? And that would be worth devoting a life to, even if all we could do is save a few. But the reality is we can go far beyond just saving a few because the stories of these few we save can inspire people all over the world to fight to save them all. And I know this from I mean, you talk about the fur ban in California. If you had told me 20 years ago that we're going to ban fur, a $600 million industry in the fashion capital of America, Los Angeles, that every fur coat would be illegal to sell, 20 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. And I'm one of the most optimistic animal rights activists I know. And we did it. We did it, you
Yeah.
know, we did it. It went into effect in 2019. It was a grassroots political effort against a huge amount of money. We had basically no money at all. Like it was just a bunch of random people who had seen enough of the footage of fur farms, seen enough of animals, including dogs, being skinned and beaten and caged, and said, enough is enough. This is going to stop. And we did it. And that is an example of systemic change that happens partly because we have empathy for the one. And so do not doubt the power of your empathy because the empathy you have and the suffering you feel vicariously for the animals, the anger you feel about the injustice, but also the awe you feel over an animal who's been saved, other people can share those emotions. And in fact, will share those emotions in the same way that we think about these historical episodes of, you know, the Underground Railroad and the American anti-slavery movement, or the people who saved Anne Frank from the Holocaust. I mean, it is a large percentage of Americans and Canadians and people around the world who hear these stories and are inspired by them. That's not because the human species suddenly changed between 1850 and 2024. It's because these stories have an inherent power. And once they break through, people will be inspired. So it's our job to use these stories, and the drama is part of it, because a good story has to have a big challenge. And so in many ways, the greater the challenge, the greater the sacrifice we make, the more powerful the story and the more transformative the change we can achieve with it. But it
Yeah.
depends on us telling those stories.
And I always talk about, Wayne, for advocates, you don't need to be the person that is in the original story to tell a story that's going to
Mhm.
change people's minds. Like everything that you're sharing today, the stories, for somebody to say, hey, I have a friend. I'm sure you won't mind people saying you're as their friend. I have a friend who went into one of these facilities or went into one of these factory farms, and this is what they saw, and I think keeping those in your back pocket, and just sort of spreading the word, spreading the narrative.
Yeah.
We have folks like you who are doing the hard work, and we can all disseminate this, through our own channels, our own communities.
Give yourself
um
some credit. All this work is hard. And honestly, organizing, I think, is in many ways among the hardest things to do in the movement. Just getting people together like the way you're doing right here. So it's all hard, but it's all incredibly meaningful. And, it's all necessary. So, thanks to you and for everyone for being here. Because the only ways for these stories to spread is for people to get opportunities to share them with each other.
Yeah, and absolutely. And for those of you who are like, oh God, it's hard to hear these stories. There's so much sadness, it's like breathe it in, feel it, like have a cry, punch the air, whatever you need to do, and then get up and get to work,
Mhm.
because I like to really think about, these actions that I do, like maybe down the line, this is going to save 10 animals, or this is going to save 100 animals, or, so
Yeah,
I think that's just a really, a way to empower ourselves in a very disempowering system.
100%.
Yeah. So, Wayne, how about let's talk about, it's been about a year since you were in jail.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what landed you there? And how were those, I think it was 38 days in jail. How
Mhm.
was it? Tell us a little bit about if you learned anything,
Yeah.
or yeah.
So what landed me in jail was starting in 2015, we had been reporting violations of California animal cruelty law to the authorities in Sonoma County. And Sonoma County is sort of the breadbasket in Northern California. There's a lot of farming there. It's a weird county because it's a lot of like hippies and back to the land folks who moved to Sonoma County in the 1960s, and they grow weed and they have drugs and do all sorts of wild things that are way cooler than anything I've ever done because my life is very boring. And I don't even
Oh,
drink.
right.
So there's a lot of wine being grown. It's not just weed. It's like weed and wine and factory farms. But this law went into effect in January 2015 that was described by Peter Singer as the most important animal welfare law in the movement's history, called Proposition 2. And what Proposition 2 did was it banned the intensive confinement of certain farm animals, including egg-laying hens. The law, by its own language, required that animals be given enough space so that they could stand up, spread their wings or limbs, and turn around fully and freely for majority of the day. You could not confine them for more than a majority of the day in situations where they could not do that. And it was widely understood by virtually everyone, including folks in the industry, as banning a particular practice in egg farming called battery cages. And battery cages are these like basically filing cabinet style cages where they confine anywhere from 8 to 12 birds. They'll give them anywhere from 70 to maybe 120 square inches each, and clearly a violation of this law. So
About a sheet
beginning
of
in
paper. But
sheet of
that's an
paper,
area
yeah.
of a
So
sheet of paper. Yeah.
116 square inches. Do you guys use the metric system in Canada? I don't even remember.
We do, yes.
Okay.
Oh, we
So
use both. We're
use both.
confused.
Okay. So
Yeah.
square foot. So a foot is
So
basically
we
one
know
third of a
feet.
meter. Okay, feet.
Yeah,
So a
yeah,
square
we know
foot of
feet. Yeah.
space is like about the amount of space that each of these birds will get their entire lives. And this is banned. It went into effect in January 2015. And initially through open records requests, but eventually through my own inspections of farms, we found that many companies, including one of the largest egg producers in Sonoma County, were just outright violating Prop 2 and lying about it. They went to the New York Times and said, California hens, literally there's a headline in the New York Times It's either the headline or the first sentence that says, California hens are now living the good life, right? And I mean, first of all, Prop 2 was not actually giving them that much space. It's just, enough space so you could turn around once your entire life is not some sort of grand resort. It's just a little better than the torture you were receiving before. But secondly, the state's own inspectors are saying these companies are all violating the law. They're confining animals and we're citing them and saying, hey, you can't do that, but no one's enforcing the law. And we went to district attorneys and county attorneys across the state of California and asked them, hey, can you enforce the law? And every single one of them, like literally every single one of them said, we don't enforce the law. We're not involved in this. Go to the USDA. And the USDA, which is the federal agricultural department that in theory supervises factory farms in the United States, said, we don't supervise this either because this is a state cruelty law. We're a federal agency that handles federal regulations. And so nothing was being done. And so starting in 2016, we started going with cameras and rescuing birds from these cages ourselves. We documented this in multiple exposés. We found it in multiple egg farms, but it was all being led by this guy who was, at the time that Prop 2 was going into effect and being fought over in 2008, all the way through 2015, was the head of, I think it was, I forget the name of the exact institution, but I think it was the California Egg Producers. So it's like the chief lobbying organization of egg producers in the state of California is a guy by the name of Arnie Reebly. And one of the things we found bizarre was Arnie Reebly was, on the one hand, in 2008, when this ballot initiative originally passed, banning the intensive confinement of egg farms, was saying, this is stupid, we're against this, this is impinging on our freedom. So he was against it back then. After it went into effect, he sued the state of California twice, I think, if I recall correctly, to try and get it invalidated, to strike it down as unconstitutional, lost those lawsuits. But somehow in 2015, when it goes into effect, the New York Times and all these other publications, and this was actually one of my first and jarring experiences with how the mainstream media often does just take the narrative of those in authority, whether it's people in positions of power within corporations, people with positions of power in the government, will just parrot exactly what's being said. And obviously, and hopefully in the United States, we've learned this from things like the Iraq War and weapons of mass destruction, which was also parroted by the New York Times, or the withdrawal from Afghanistan when the US military literally shot missiles at nonprofit workers and their kids and claimed they were attacking terrorists, right? And we should think about this in the context of all the other debates we're having about animals and about other forms of violence supported by powerful institutions. But it was pretty stunning to me that the New York Times just kind of accepted Arnie Reebly's statement that, oh yeah, we're actually one of the leaders in compliance with Prop 2. We think this is great. We're going to lead the entire state and frankly the entire nation in taking animals out of cages. And what do we find when we walk in to Sunrise Farms? And I think it was January of 2016 for the first time, row after row after row of hens in cages. So this is a violation of law. It's a criminal law. We get former prosecutors, law professors, basically everyone, even the lawyers for the county itself. We presented to them and they agreed this is a violation of law, but no one was doing anything to save these hens. So in May of 2018, after 3 years of doing everything we could to get the state to enforce its own laws, to enforce a law that was supported by more voters in 2008, 8.2 million voters voted for it, than had supported any ballot initiative in California history. It was the most popular ballot initiative in California history. So it was the will of the people. After 3 years of failure to get this law even frankly investigated, I mean, there wasn't even an investigation that started. And to this day, and I don't mean to diminish the efforts of the activists who fought for Prop 2 and Prop 12, because I think it was a worthwhile effort, and I'm very proud of them, and I participated in these campaigns myself. It is important to point out that even now, almost 10 years after Prop 2 went into effect, years after Prop 12 went into effect, Prop 12 was like basically the new version of Prop 2 that went into effect or was passed in 2018. There's yet to be a single successful enforcement action of either of these laws, right? But we had spent 3 years trying to get someone to even investigate a farm for violation of Prop 2 and pointing out that, look, there are something like 20 million hens in the state of California. Surely one of them there must be one hen who's being illegally confined. You cannot tell me that compliance is 100%. That's like saying, there are 1 million people in San Francisco. That's like saying, we've had 20 years of life in San Francisco. There has not been a single crime committed over the last 20 years. It's like, come on, you kidding me? 20 million people over 20 years, and you're going to tell me there hasn't been a single crime committed? It was farcical. It was statistically absurd, impossible what the government was telling us. And so in 2018, after years of trying to get them to do something, 500 of us showed up ourselves and did what the government should have been doing, which is helping the animals trapped in cages. And that's what we did. So we went to Sunrise Farms. By that point, they had actually, partly because of all the pressure we had placed on them, changed their facility, so they had gotten rid of the cages, although they had been lying about them for years up to that point. But the animals were still being intensively confined. There were still violations of state animal cruelty law. And 37 of the birds got out that day, many of whom were extremely sick and injured, one of whom died, Libby. She died shortly after we took her to the vet. And for organizing that demonstration, my role in that demonstration was I did organize it. I mean, I planned it. I did all the trainings, and not myself, but with a bigger team of activists at Direct Action Everywhere to get people ready for that action. But as a result of that demonstration, where I essentially just talked to the police and talked to the owners about why we were there, I was charged with, I don't even remember how many felony it was initially, but by the time we got to trial in 2023, there were, I think, two remaining felony charges, both felony conspiracy, because I had not personally walked in any barns. I had not personally moved any animals. I was a legal liaison wearing a shirt not dissimilar to the shirt I'm wearing now, just discussing the legal issues. But I was charged with conspiracy for conspiring to rescue these animals, convicted in a court case that it's actually interesting we're talking about this today, because we're about to file an appellate brief tomorrow, where we were denied many defenses we were entitled to under the Constitution of the United States, and then sentenced to 90 days in jail, of which I served 37 days because I had been jailed so many times in Sonoma County in the 5 years prior to my conviction that I earned credit for all the times I'd been jailed previously. And so, yeah, 1 year ago on November 2nd, I was convicted. On November 30th, I was sentenced to 90 days. And it was time that I very gladly served. So you also asked, what impact did that have on me? It was a good experience. And I don't mean that in the sense that I thought it was a pleasant experience. It was an awful experience in terms of kind of the day-to-day restrictions on your life. It's a stressful place, like most of my time in jail, there's at least one person within a cell or two of mine who was going through some sort of serious psychotic break, to the point that there'd be people smashing their heads against the walls, screaming uncontrollably. And it's just hard to be around that and not have it affect you in some way, especially if you're a remotely empathetic person, because there's enormous suffering. And I will say, for those of you who don't know about the suffering in American jails, I mean, the United States is one of the most punitive and unjustly punitive nations on the face of the planet Earth. We have more than 6 times as many people sitting in jails and prisons in the United States as they have in China, what is widely and correctly understood as a dictatorial, anti-democratic regime, many of whom are in jail and are completely innocent of the crimes they're charged with, because we don't actually give people effective assistance of counsel. So it's hard to be in that environment where there's so many people suffering unjustly, and not have it affect you. So you might be asking, why the heck was this a good experience? And I think the reason it was a good experience for me was 2 reasons. One is, I think probably more than any other experience I've had, it brought me closer to what the animals are experiencing. And frankly, jail is like, it's like the Ritz compared to a factory farm. Like, it really is. And I have a buddy and a big supporter of ours who told me, even before, he always tells me this before each of the trials. He says, just remember Lily, remember Lizzie, remember Ching. Ching was one of the birds we found in a cage. She was collapsed on the ground, like she had basically mutilated, deformed feet from standing on wire her entire life, and was having trouble walking. And so she was getting trampled on by the other birds, and we got her out. And this buddy of mine always says, just remember where these animals were, and remember what they were going through, and it'll make your job easier. And he's right. Like, every day when I was going on trial and every day when I was in jail, I thought about Lily, I thought about Lizzie, these little piglets we saved, and I thought about Ching, the little bird we saved. And it made me appreciate even the small freedoms I had, the access to food and water, the fact that, I could stand up and spread my limbs. I could, even when I was in solitary confinement and, a 50 square foot jail, I could at least pace back and forth. You know, that's a freedom that the animals of this earth are never given when they're trapped in factory farms. But the other reason I think it was a good experience was because I knew it had purpose, right? I knew that the fact that I was in jail, and this is where all the people on the Zoom come into the story. Like I knew there were people on the outside who are going to continue to advocate for the animals, who are going to use my story, use my incarceration, and use it. You know, like I wanted people to do that. That was the entire point of the action, to talk about the fact that, did you know there's a man in California who's sitting in a jail cell because he took a few sick birds to the vet. He didn't even actually take them himself. He just advocated for sick and dying birds, some of whom died shortly after arriving at the vet. For doing that, he was convicted of a felony, and he is sitting in a jail cell in a cage. That is something that when people hear this, I mean, a lot of people are very resistant to the blame game when it comes to animal rights, because if you immediately lead with, bro, why aren't you vegan? Come on. Do you hate animals or something? I mean, people are not interested in that. They feel shame. They get defensive. When you tell them a story like that, they're like, whoa, can you tell me more about that? And again, I think it's especially true if it's somebody you know. And like all of you know me now, you can use this story. You can
Yeah.
say your friend Wayne was sitting in
Yeah.
a jail cell because he and some other people tried to take some sick birds at the vet. And the industry was so powerful, the government was so corrupt, they threw him in a jail cell himself for that. It's a story that has a lot of power. And I knew every day when I was in jail that, you know, people are going to be advocating for the animals and using the experience I was going through to help them. And that gave it a lot of purpose.
Mm, absolutely. And, you know, it sounds like maybe even worse than the jail sentence, though, was the conditions put on you.
Hmm.
In addition, tell us a little bit about that and how rare this condition is.
Yeah, there were a number of conditions placed on me: community service, stay away from CAFOs, that sort of thing. But the unusual condition was I was barred from being within, I think it's 100 feet of 14 people who are considered my co-conspirators in this case. This includes people like Caroline Paul, who's a New York Times bestselling author of children's books, who actually just published a book, and I can't talk to her about it because, you know, I'm super happy for her and I think she's amazing. And she's done a TED Talk that's got millions of views. She was just on one of my intellectual heroes, Steve Levitt's podcast, and I can't congratulate her and text her and say, Caroline, this is amazing. You're on Steve Levitt's podcast. Includes, you know, people like my best friend Priya, like someone who, like through thick and thin over the last 10 years, through my family members dying, including my mom, my dog, Natalie, my cat, Joan, she has been my number one source of support. And, you know, honestly, I just wouldn't have been able to do what I've done over the last 10 years without her. But the court ruled as part of my sentencing that I was prohibited for 2 years from any contact, even indirect. So for the record, I'm not telling anyone to contact Caroline or Priya, because if anyone reports me for that,
Right.
I get flash incarcerated. I'm back in jail, snap of the fingers.
Wow.
But
Unbelievable.
when I talk to criminal defense attorneys in Sonoma County, they're like, this doesn't even have to gangsters who get incarcerated. And you get people who, you know, are convicted of conspiracy to murder, you know, they're to engage in gang violence and murder people, and they're not getting these sorts of conditions. In fact, our appellate lawyer, you know, we had a public appellate defender initially. He said, like, I've never seen this. I've been doing appellate work in criminal law for the last 20 years. I've never seen a condition like this before. So it's very, very unusual, and it just shows the extent to which the industry is intent on undermining our rights to associate, our rights to speak. Has also gagged in this case unconstitutionally. The ACLU of California actually came out in my defense because the court prevented me from speaking to the media about my case, which is a pretty fundamental violation of the First Amendment. Um, but again, I mean, I think like all this, it sucks. I'm not going to say it's pleasant. It's not pleasant, but all this sacrifice and whatever relatively small suffering I go through compared to the animals, it's got a purpose. And I know that, you know, people hear things like this and hopefully be motivated to do more for animals yourselves, to use these stories to create change, um, and encourage yourself to be a little braver too. Because it's not that, again, it's not that these things feel okay to me. They don't. It's not that jail was fun in some sort of day-to-day, moment-to-moment hedonic experience way. It wasn't fun. It was terrible. There was like a moment where the jail cells were literally flooding with feces, and the guards wouldn't let us out. Like we were so, there was like literally a stream of poop coming out of our toilet, and our neighbor's cell was actually flooding. It was like getting to the point that it was like, ankle high. And we thought it was just going to rise up, and the guards wouldn't even let him out. And wouldn't let any of us out. They said, like, you're just going to sit there, just get on your beds. So as you can imagine, that was not the most pleasant experience. But the point isn't whether our lives are pleasant always. The point is whether our lives have purpose. In every moment in jail, every moment, even under these constraints and probation, my life has a lot of purpose. And there's no greater gift in life than that. You can go through so much, and a lot of the smaller anxieties and suffering that most people struggle with. Like I sleep on the living room floor. I'm completely bankrupt. I have like no money left. They took everything from me. Those things don't bother me at all. And it's partly because I know my life has enormous purpose. And again, I'm not saying everyone has to take those sorts of risks or bear that sort of sacrifice, but everyone needs to sacrifice in some way, right? And this is one of the things Doug McAdam taught me a long time ago, that part of the reason nonviolent direct action works is because it is actually a fight. Um, it is a dynamic field in the sense that, you know, Frederick Douglass, the famous anti-slavery activist, said this himself. If you don't put any skin in the game, if you're not sacrificing in some ways, you're not actually part of the fight. Fights are often nonviolent, but there's no fight where you don't have to bear some of the pain. And so, like, if you're not feeling it at least a little bit, in some way, you're probably just not in the fight. And this is my challenge to all of you. So if you're not a little uncomfortable, you're doing it wrong. But the great thing is, if you make yourself a little uncomfortable, and maybe even more uncomfortable than you think you're capable of bearing, over the long term, it makes you stronger and more effective. And it even brings beauty to your life in ways you can't even imagine. Like, my life is beautiful in ways that I can't even describe to people, even though I've gone through all these experiences. And that's partly because of my willingness to sacrifice.
Wayne, I just want to give you a bit of feedback from the chat. Betty says, we are honored to call you friend, Wayne, and that's got so many hearts. Jaslyn said, coming across a pig's rescue story is why I went vegan. And Tenebrae is saying how threatened the industry is by compassionate acts. And so that's something, I would love for you to speak a little bit more. Do you think the industry, the government I mean, obviously these trials are probably proof that they're feeling it. Are you sort of seeing other evidence of it, that, bringing this out and showing the animals, showing what they're up to, and that people are willing to risk, their freedom to be able to save them? What do you think? How do you think this is sort of affecting the powers that be?
Yeah, I don't think this is always the best measure of how effective our activism is, but I think it is a measure, which is how much they're investing in trying to stop you. And I can tell you, they've invested an enormous amount of resources. The highest level executives at places like Smithfield, Ken Sullivan, the CEO of Smithfield at the time, was in direct consultation with law enforcement to try and stop us from doing what we're doing. The CEO of Costco. So Costco is sort of, I still don't understand why Costco got out of this unscathed, but at the time when we investigated Circle 4 Farms and rescued Lily and Lizzie and exposed the use of gestation crates, Costco was making a big deal about their animal welfare policies and the 5 freedoms they supposedly were giving the animals. And they're a huge buyer from Smithfield. And so we started this campaign basically saying, look, if you're going to give animals freedom, you got to take them out of the cages. I'm sorry, this is just an outright lie. And the CEO of Costco, a man by the name of Craig Jelinek, he's no longer the CEO, but he was in consultation with the FBI. And collectively, the government and the industry probably spent at least millions of dollars, maybe even tens of millions of dollars, to try and put me in prison. And they lost. We won in court, right? And it was, honestly, I didn't even expect that. Like, because I was going into thinking, oh, we're going to win by losing, but we won by winning. I was like, oh, we won by winning. And not because I don't think we can win these cases. I just didn't think that would be a case that was winnable, because 1 out of 3 people in that county work for Smithfield. It's a county that's 85% Trump, and, I'm a Berkeley, now San Francisco, but then Berkeley Buddhist vegan is very far left. And like, there isn't a person of color within 100 miles, other than, the slaves in some cases that work at Circle Four Farms. And I don't, it's not an exaggeration. Circle Four Farms was actually implicated in a slavery scandal where they were shipping people from Asia, forcing them to work and not paying them. And ultimately, the government contractor of the company was charged with human trafficking and slavery for enslaving these people. Um, so one measure is just the amount of effort they've made to try and destroy us. And a lot of the efforts, I will say, are just much more insidious, because I think one of the things the industry is learning is that they're not really able to directly challenge us, and even directly incarcerating us is problematic. So there are these organizations like the Center for Consumer Freedom or the Center for Organizational Research and Education that use disinformation and smear campaigns to basically try and, because they know that our greatest strength is not our financial resources, not our physical resources, because we're not fighting them physically, we're not fighting them financially, we're fighting them ethically. And so they try and exhaust our moral resources by using smear campaigns. And just the amount of money and time the industry has spent on websites like Activist Facts, people like Richard Berman. You can Google him, Richard Berman. 60 Minutes, I think, once called him Dr. Evil, and he's like the propagandist of the industry. And he realizes the most important propaganda isn't even directly propaganda about animals and animal rights, because it's just hard to argue against animal rights. But if we can undermine the people, right? If we can destroy the leadership, we can destroy the organizations, then we can win. And that's what they do. So a lot of the rumors you hear about various organizations, PDHSUS, stem from Richard Berman and his organization, the Center for Consumer Freedom, that is funded by, in some cases, by not just the industry, but sometimes the government funds these things, but another measure of success that is probably more important is just the number of people we've seen who said they want to help in some way. And I think that lots and lots of sacrifices, lots of pain, on my part and the part of others, but also so many people, so the fact that this demonstration in May of 2018, where we got 500 people to walk with us into Sunrise Farms, this happened just days after 2 felony prosecutions came down in Utah, including the racketeering charges against me. And we're very open about this. It's not like we hid this. The moment the charges landed, we used them for press release purposes. We told everyone in the movement, and we told all the actors there on May 29th of 2018 that, look, we just want to let you know that the FBI has been chasing piglets across the country. 4 felony charges just came down on Wayne. He's facing potentially 60 years in prison. You should know this before you take action today. And it just fired people up even more, right? Even more people wanted to step up and take action and try and help these animals. So by that metric, the amount of grassroots support we've gotten with relatively little in terms of financial resources is incredible. And that is by far the most important measure of movement power. How many people are getting active for animals? How connected and effective are they? What sort of capacities do they have? So by both those measures, how much the industry has had to respond and how much we've seen our activists build up their capacity and power, these campaigns have been very successful. The main reason that this sort of strategy might not be effective is because we've just seen a significant decrease since COVID-19. I think social organizations of all sorts, even just civic organizations, have seen great declines in participation because everyone's kind of sitting at home, doom scrolling on Instagram and playing video games, or engaged in sports betting or all sorts of other, I was going to say silly, but sorry if anyone's a huge fan of sports betting. I just read an article about how much sports betting is destroying America, so I'm not the biggest fan. But apologies if you're a big sports better. I'm sure
no
there's
apologies
some
needed.
I'm sure there's someone out
snap
here who's
out of
like
it.
really into DraftKings and you're spending all day. And maybe for some people it's meaningful, but there's so many people sitting at home, like on Twitter, on Instagram, playing video games, sports betting on some silly DraftKings website, watching the NFL, instead of doing things that create real meaning. And that's been the greatest threat, like the lack of engagement that's a result of these corporations, again, not directly challenging grassroots movements, but indirectly through advertising, through video games, through all these things that just attract people's attention, distract them from substantive things that would really be meaningful for their lives and meaningful for the world. That's been a real threat to real grassroots organizing. But I think that can be overcome, and movements happen in fits and starts. It's not always going to be amazing. And so while we've seen a significant decrease in the number of open rescues and open rescue activists in the last couple of years, especially since COVID-19, I think it's going to bounce back. And, maybe there's somebody who's listening to this call who's going to be the next Wayne Hsiung, and frankly, better than me, going to do 100 times more effective work than I've done. And I wait for that to happen. And frankly, I already, there are people on here who've done tremendous things that are in many ways more effective than what I've done, like Jenny. Jenny has won historic victories in Canada for open rescue. She's continued to go hard, even in the face of all the prosecution. And this is not someone who's super rich, who's super famous. She just does what she knows is right, helps the
Yeah.
animals, and makes immense change. Or are
Jenny
you
just
and Camille?
retired and she decided that she was going for broke, and we love her for
Yeah,
it.
no, absolutely. Are
Yeah.
what animal justice has done with like Camille and the litigation that's happened to fight the ag gag laws, to defend activists like Jenny. I mean, so there's movements always happen in fits and starts. There's always going to be slow periods. We're definitely in a slow period now, but the key thing is in these slow periods, we need to build capacity. So everyone who's listening, make sure you're reading, make sure you're watching YouTube videos, you're learning about how to become more effective. Because when that next opportunity presents itself, you've got to be ready. And even being a part of this conversation, asking the questions that are being asked, getting them answered, probing what could be done better than what I did. That is what's going to build the movement over the long term. And I see it happening every day.
Mm. Wayne, I said in my promo of you, like, I find you to be such an amazing philosopher too, in this movement. And I'm curious, what do you feel are some of the other top things that we need to focus on in the animal rights movement right now? What are, if you could, conduct this
Yeah.
great, movement, what would be some key things that you would like to see happen or like to see shifted?
Here's the big one for me. We need to start telling stories that show people how the animal rights movement helps us all. And I don't mean in these kind of more traditional ways, like, oh, don't you realize going vegan makes you healthier? Or don't you know going vegan helps the environment? Those are all true things, and I think we should talk about those things. I mean, at a much more fundamental spiritual level, that when we hurt animals, when we build systems that are hurting animals, all of us who are vulnerable, and all of us are vulnerable at times, are endangered. The future of life on this earth, the future of human civilization is at risk because of what we do to animals. And we need to start telling stories about how that's true. Um, just one
Can you
concrete
give me an
example of this.
example? Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So here's one example that I think is, so I'm sitting here in San Francisco. Um, I could walk over to the offices of OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT. Um, Anthropic, if anyone uses Claude, it's another chatbot that it's all the rage, like literally trillions of dollars of investment are going to this. AI is getting better and better. And it is fascinating to me how many people who are deep into AI and artificial intelligence are increasingly aware of how the dangers to animals will eventually become danger to human beings. Because if it is the case that greater intelligence justifies violence against lesser intelligent beings, then if AI eventually becomes smarter than us, apparently it's entitled to kill us, right? And that might seem like a fanciful vision, and it might be. I don't know. I mean, there's some recent discussion about how maybe AI's hit a wall, but if you look at the graph, it's kind of shocking because AI is going up a cliff. It is getting more and more powerful, and some of us, you've probably seen this yourselves in just using ChatGPT. It's like writing things, like ask it to write an essay in the words of Wayne Hsiung, and you'll be astonished to see like, well, that's kind of creepy. That actually sounds like something Wayne Hsiung would have written, and it's really good. It might be better than the things that Wayne Hsiung writes. It's not just in this space. It's self-driving cars. It's scientific research. There's an artificial intelligence called Alpha Folds that is better than the best PhD scientists in predicting the molecular structure of proteins. You know, this artificial intelligence does things instantly that the best PhD students at places like Harvard or the University of Toronto or the University, you're in Vancouver, UBC. So you're in Vancouver, right, Kimberly?
No, I'm in Toronto.
Toronto. Okay. So the
Yeah.
best researchers at places like McGill or the University of Toronto, they spend 4 years, the smartest people in the world, trying to predict the molecular structure of a protein. Alpha folds can do this instantly, right? And if it is the case that more intelligence leads to more moral weight, then we're all screwed potentially. As these,
Right.
already AlphaFolds is smarter than all of us, at least when it comes to molecular modeling of proteins. So maybe we should just give the world to AlphaFolds. And it is very interesting. Sam Altman, the founder and chief executive officer of OpenAI, partly for this reason, He's a vegetarian, and he's talked openly about how we need to cancel animal ag. Like, this is a violent exploitative industry. Just because these animals are less intelligent than us in some ways, in many other ways actually more intelligent than us, does not justify violence against them. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of these broader narrative arcs about vulnerability and power and what the nature of democracy is. So, like, one of the things I've been writing recently is that this is not a true democracy unless we include the powerless beings on the planet Earth. And so I don't believe America is currently a democracy, because we have 10 billion farm animals and hundreds of billions of wild animals who are not represented at all in our political system. And I know, people joke about, oh, come on, you want to give animals the right to vote. I think we should start going in this direction, start painting these grander visions of what democracy means, what justice means, to ensure that all the living beings of this earth, all the sentient beings, including human beings who are vulnerable, and eventually, relative to the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, all of us are vulnerable. Like, Mark Zuckerberg is one person who has more control over the communications infrastructure of the United States than probably the other 299,999,000 people combined. I'm not even exaggerating, because Facebook and Instagram, for those of us in communications, we know how, like, a little tweak to the algorithms can completely silence us or make our movements incredibly powerful. And Mark Zuckerberg, one human being, has complete control over all of that. He's created a corporate structure where he is essentially the dictator of Facebook and Meta, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. He controls everything. Like, they cannot vote him out. He will control that company forever. So if gaps in power are justified, if people in more powerful or more intelligent positions, like, say Zuckerberg controls AI and he becomes more intelligent than us because he has the tools of AI, does that justify him dominating the rest of the planet? Surely not. We don't want that future, but that is the future we are on the path towards, unless there is a huge reckoning in human civilization about the nature of power, justice, and vulnerability, right? Because all of us are vulnerable relative to Mark Zuckerberg. All of us are vulnerable relative to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk or Donald Trump. And we need to reverse that. And the only way to guarantee reverse that is to ensure that even the most powerless beings in our society are protected. And who are the most powerless beings in our society? Who have always been the most powerless beings in our societies since the inception of the human species 2.5 million years ago. It is not our fellow humans, because we are the most powerful species on this planet by orders of magnitude. It is the other animals of this earth. So I think we need to start developing narratives that are narratives that show how all of our fates are intertwined, that if we actually want a system that will protect us when we are vulnerable, we have to protect the animals too. And we've seen how the power of this, even the recent presidential election, one of the reasons the Peanut the squirrel story went so mega viral to the point that it might have decided the election, was because people saw Peanut as an innocent victim. They saw the family of Peanut. And, I know there's critiques of that sanctuary, and there've been a lot of debates within the animal rights movement as to whether this is an ethical sanctuary. I don't know. I frankly don't care. What I do know is that Peanut was a vulnerable being relative to the fate of the most powerful people on this earth. He was playing a game of thrones, of presidents, of dictators, and democracies, and he lost. And that will be the same fate of all of us, unless we can ensure that in the future, little squirrels like Peanut are not killed for the crime of being a squirrel. And that's what he was killed for. So I think that's the big thing for me. I think we collectively have to start developing these more powerful narratives that link the fate of other human beings and even the fate of human civilization to the animals. And that might sound traumatic. It might sound, a little like a sci-fi movie, but it's true. We will not save the planet Earth from catastrophe, from extinction, unless we preserve the animals.
That gives us something to chew on. Thank you, Wayne. I have so many questions for you, and we're already running out of time. And okay, so one of the things I really need to hear from you on is the Simple Heart Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? I mean, we all knew you with DXE. You moved on from DXE, I think, because you had to, because of all the trial stuff. And correct me if I'm wrong. But the Simple Heart Initiative. What's the plan? What do you envision? What's the dream here, Wayne?
Yeah, so the Simple Heart is partly because I can't talk to anyone at DX anymore, but partly because I thought there needed to be an organization narrowly focused on open rescue. And open rescue is a narrative building device. As like, when I talk about grand narrative, how we need to have a story, similar to the civil rights movement and the anti-slavery movement, this very ambitious, what Evan Wolfson who's one of the leaders of the Freedom to Marry campaign, calls the ladder of clarity. We need to have a big vision that's clear, just so clear, you know? So if you're going to climb up a difficult ladder, you want to know, hey, when I get to the top, there's got to be something amazing up there. Like, what's up there that's so cool, right? So, but I thought when we started DXE, and I think even more strongly now, that one of the ways we can convince people to climb that ladder is by telling the story of rescue, by just pointing out that I mean, I'll just point this out to all of us today, and we should always remember this. There is a dog sitting in a cage spinning just like Julie, who is just as desperate as she was, who is scared, who is lonely, who's never set foot outside of that cage, has never seen the sunlight, never had someone touch her with love, never had a family. And she wants it so much. This is the only thing she wants. She just wants, she would be so desperate for even just a few moments with someone who cared about her, who pet her on the head, who gave her a treat. And all of us have the power to save her. Like, we have that power. And that is the power of the narrative of rescue, right? And the same thing with Peanut. Like, if it's funny because Elon Musk is one of the people just railing on the story of Peanut and getting so upset. And I think it was genuine. When you listen to him, I just did a conversation with David Rams. David Rams does really great work. Go follow him on YouTube because he's brilliant. But he did these YouTube videos about Peanut the squirrel, and he points out that, like, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, a couple days before the election, they went off on the Peanut story and just blamed Democrats for it, which is kind of silly and stupid because
Wayne,
yeah,
a lot of folks here, because they're from Canada, might not know the
the Peanut the
Wayne,
squirrel
sorry, the
story.
peanuts, the
Okay,
scroll. Can you just give us a
yeah,
quick little
very quick
rundown?
story.
Yeah.
An animal rescue called Peanut's Farm Sanctuary. I think Peanut's Freedom Farm Sanctuary. A squirrel whose mom got hit by a car and died. This person rehabilitated Peanut, tried to release Peanut in the wild. Peanut got attacked, had been too acclimated to humans, and had to come back into his home. And he made a social media profile called Peanut. I think it's called Peanut the Squirrel. It's still on Instagram, and there's a lot of beautiful videos. Someone reported him for having an illegal wildlife rehab facility. The government comes in, seizes little Peanut, and also a raccoon named Fred. And then because Peanut bites one of the workers, they kill them both. They just kill them, claiming we had to kill them because we had to find out if they had rabies because he bit one of our workers. It's like, well, of course, I mean, that's so stupid for so many reasons. And actually, I'm about to release a conversation with David Rams about why that's stupid. But one of the principal reasons that's stupid is it doesn't affect the course of conduct you take. When you're bitten by a wild animal, you always go get a rabies shot regardless. And whether the animal has rabies or not doesn't affect what you're supposed to do. So it's just a completely contrived explanation. But for whatever reason, this became a rallying cry on the right, unfortunately. I think, honestly, the main reason it was a rallying cry on the right is just because the left was silent. And the left has been silent on animal rights, and they don't understand the power of these animal narratives. But there were so many millions of Americans, including a lot of Democrats, including a lot of undecided voters, who saw a Democratic government in New York attack this person, kill the squirrel, and they were really upset about it. You know, because they just imagined this poor little squirrel taken from their family, sitting in a cage, scared and alone, and then killed by these government employees, by these law enforcement officers. And so Elon Musk goes on Joe Rogan's podcast, and you can tell he's actually, like, genuinely upset about it. Like, he's genuinely upset that this poor squirrel was killed. And it's like, why would anyone hurt a squirrel? And that is the power of vulnerability. So vulnerability is normally a weakness, right? Because if you're vulnerable, by definition, you're subject to some sort of manipulation or exploitation or violence because you're vulnerable. But in narrative terms, vulnerability can be a strength, because when a being is especially vulnerable, a dog, a cat, a kitten, a little squirrel, a child, then people realize that when someone hurts that vulnerable being, there's no justification for it, right? You cannot justify. Peanut didn't do anything to you, right? And they tried to make it seem like, well, Peanut deserved what he got. He bit us. And, like, literally the entire internet is just laughing about it, saying, are you out of your mind? This tiny little squirrel bit you, so you killed him when you charged into his home and arrested his dad and, like, you know, seized him and put him in a cage. Of course he's going to bite you. You deserve to be bitten. Leave the poor squirrel alone. And Peanut shows the power of these narratives. Like, if we're strategic about using narrative. And the problem with the Peanut story and David Rams and I just had a conversation. We're going to actually post this to YouTube tomorrow, so you can listen to the conversation if you want, about how both of us agree the animal rights movement honestly kind of failed. The left failed, first of all, because Kamala Harris's campaign was actually asked by the New York Times for comment, and she just said, oh, this is beneath us. We don't even want to comment on this. This is stupid. This is ridiculous. We've got bigger, more important things. It's like, No, this is representative of the problem every American is facing. This is the problem. The government isn't listening to us. The government is hurting us and not listening when we say we're being hurt. And you can see that in Peanut's story, not just in what happened to his dad, Mark, but also what happened to the little squirrel. The government is not listening to us, that someone's being hurt and you're doing it and you won't stop it. Right. And so it's representative of a bigger story for so many Americans. And this is what I was saying about tying the narrative of what's happening to animals to what's happening to human beings too, because so many Americans and Canadians and people around the world are recognizing these big, powerful corporations, these governments, these huge concentrations of power, they're not serving us. And when human beings complain about this, it's easy to dismiss them, because say like, oh, come on, your life is good, or to blame them for it. Like the right is always saying, oh, you woke liberals, you're getting what you deserve because you did X, so you deserved it. Like a person of color gets attacked by the police. Well, you were like insulting, or you were violent, or you're a criminal. No one can blame the squirrel. No one can blame the puppy at Ridglan Farms for what happened to them.
Yeah.
And that is
They're so
incredibly
innocent.
powerful in terms of narrative potential because of their vulnerability and showing why all power needs to be carefully checked.
So, Wayne, we'd love to keep you here forever. There's so many good questions, but I know you have so much to do. But can you tell us how we can support you? You're going into different things right now. You're working with Animal Rising in the UK on a case. We love Animal Rising. We had Rose on here recently, and you are also working on we obviously Ridglan you're waiting for. So how can people support the Simple Heart Initiative? How can people support you in the things that you're doing right now? What are some, besides getting active, are there any other specific ways? Your YouTube channel, subscribe, where would you like us to put some efforts?
Yeah, so there's a podcasting YouTube show, just Wayne Hsiung on YouTube, the Simple Heart Podcast. Check that out, subscribe. Everyone who subscribes, the algorithms show the content to other people as a result. So really encourage all of you. The other to hit that subscribe button or like button or follow button. The other thing, just kind of in the immediate future, is there's a chance we'll have an opportunity to rescue 3,000 dogs pretty soon. And so stay tuned for that. Like if anyone wants to adopt a beagle, it's such an uphill battle, and the biomedical industry is so powerful in Dane County, Wisconsin. But I think we have a real chance to try and save these dogs, and we'll need everyone to support us in whatever way you can. Just go to simpleheart.org, sign up to the newsletter, and I always give kind of people suggestions on how you can help the campaign and help us save these 2,000 dogs. So there's never a dog in Wisconsin who has to live the life that Julie lived before we rescued her, and we can get all of them out. But in the longer term, I think the most important thing we have to do collectively is build our capacity. And I told you, I think the movement's in a little bit of a lull right now, and that means it's a great opportunity for us to read and learn and build our capacity and train ourselves for the next challenge. But the other thing is we have to work together, because it's, the way movements succeed is through social networks. And the way social networks succeed is by having large numbers of people with great capacity who coordinate their efforts together. And infighting and conflict is such a huge plague. And, I know, given that we have people like Jenny and Peter on the call and Shlo on our team, like the amount of conflict the movements experience, and I'm just going to say it over Gaza, I'm sorry, if you're arguing about Gaza in a way that's unproductive and making people feel hurt, you're doing it wrong. You need to stop. You're hurting the animals. And I had a recent conversation with Vegan Gaines about this. He's a very controversial figure. He's on one side of this dispute. I'm on the other side of this dispute. And I had him on my show, not to argue about Gaza, but tell him, and I told him this, you are hurting the movement. And it's not because I think his position is wrong, or I think my position is wrong. Obviously, I think my position is right, and he thinks his position is right on Gaza. It's because the metaphor I use is, imagine you're in the cancer wing of a hospital, and you run to the cancer wing and you start yelling about the flu, right? It's like, look, there are people dying of cancer here. Like, I'm sure the flu is a really big deal for you, and you're really concerned about the flu, and it's legitimate for people to be concerned about the flu. The flu's an important problem. You can maybe even argue it's more important than cancer. But right now, in this wing of the hospital, we have patients and doctors and family members who are crying and suffering from heartache because their families are dying of cancer. And that's what this space is about. And that's the way I feel about the animal rights movement. This is the greatest atrocity in human history in both the scale and severity of the suffering that's being inflicted on non-human animals. There's been nothing the planet Earth has never ever seen. And when people inject these other issues in, not because they're not substantive and not because they're not important, but even when you inject them into this movement and cause fights within the movement that cause everyone to go home, you're hurting the animals in the same way that someone yelling about the flu and the cancer wing is acting inappropriately. So, not to call anyone out, because I know everyone who's doing this is doing this with the best of intentions. We need to stop fighting about things. And the number one thing I'm seeing fights about right now, and this is just right now, because before that it was Black Lives Matter, before that it was Me Too. People are always fighting about these things, and we need to find more constructive ways to have disagreements and work things out and continue fighting for the animals.
You know, and I think there are a lot of people here that that get that you can still advocate for something, and you can do it in a constructive way. You can do it in a way that doesn't repel people. You can do it in a way that where you hold compassion, that where you can hold compassion for all involved. And so I think, you know, just a reminder that the session that we're going to be doing in 2 weeks is about, you know, navigating those, the divisions and the polarization with Irshad Manji. I don't know if you know her, Wayne, new vegan, responsible. And she's, yeah, she does an amazing work. And it's going to be really, really special to be able to, you know, learn from her on this, because you're right, Wayne. There are atrocities happening around the world. There are some that are much more pressing than others, and I would say that Gaza is definitely one of these. But we cannot lose the mantle of the biggest atrocity that's happening in our world right now. So thank you for that.
I'm just looking at her bio. This person sounds amazing. I think I'm going to come to that.
Yeah, you should.
Like,
yeah,
she's been on like Bill Maher's show and the O'Reilly Factor.
Absolutely, she had a price put on her head because of the book she wrote, The Trouble with Islam Today. So yeah, you'd love her. Maybe someday we'll introduce you.
Sounds great.
So Wayne, I just want to read a little bit more of what some of the folks are saying. Marlena said, "You're a wonderful human being. I needed a reminder that people like you exist." Daniel Kane said, "I love your newsletter. You're a brilliant writer." And I'm going to second that. I think your newsletter is so rich. And so that, like Wayne's saying, this is a time for learning. This is a great place to start, is to subscribe to Wayne's newsletter. Christy said, "You are an amazing human being, a privilege to listen to everything you said tonight. Thank you." Lisa Kiss says, "I was in Petaluma with you, Wayne, at the duck farm, along with several other Canadians. I will never forget that day. You are my hero and a hero for the animals." And Laura said, "Thank you, Wayne and Kimberly, and everyone who attended. You all bring me hope. I'm so glad I came." So Wayne, let's take Wayne and I off of spotlight so we can come back to our crew here and maybe get ready, Kirsten, with the unmute button, because Wayne, I want you to see all these people here. AJers, can we please give Wayne a big AJ? Thank you for being here and for everything you've done. Wayne, it's a pleasure. I hope we're going to get to celebrate with you very soon about Ridglan. You got us all on pins and needles too with you. Okay. So we're with you, my friend, and can't wait to celebrate. Okay.
Let's hope for the best. Let's hope for the best.
And you know what? We're hoping for the best, but it will win. We will win. The animals will win eventually. We just have to keep at it, folks. So let's unmute everybody. Can we say a very thank you and good night to Wayne? Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Bye-bye. We love you, Wayne.
We love you.
Wayne, you're an inspiration.
Yes, he is. You are. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Take it in. Take it in, Wayne.